Hey everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Fullback Dive, brought to you by the good people at the Roto Street Journal, paving your way to fantasy excellence, acting as your lead blocker to fantasy glory, and making all your football-related fantasies come true. I'm your host, Nat the Truth Jones. With me, as always, the brains of the operation, Professor Wolf of Roto Street himself. This is a fast turnaround. This might be the quickest back-to-back the Wolf and I have ever gone, and we've gone hundreds of times. So here we are. It's like 12:30 on I don't even know what day of the week it is, a Thursday, and we're here. I'm alone in my house, which never happens. I could shout if I wanted to, if the mood hits me. If there's a pick I really disagree with, I might really just give it to him. This is what we're doing. We're hitting you with tight ends. We hit you with wide receivers yesterday. I posted both the running backs and wide receivers podcasts earlier today, so check those out. They're online. But Wolf, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. Summer break just about here. I had to take a day for unfortunate reasons, but we don't need to dive into that. Unfortunate family stuff going on. But ultimately, it does give us the opportunity to get here in this earlier window, which I love. As you said, quick turnaround here. I've loved banging out these top rankings. We'll follow those up with the projection series in the next 2 weeks after that. And then it will be all the sleepers, busts, all that. I'll be off the grid for a week in Maine. Then I'll have a couple weeks, and then I'm off the grid big time for the wedding. So that's why we're kind of loading this up as much as we can here, making sure you guys have all the Roto Street Journal's takes, those of you who've leaned on us before, or those of you who are new to us. We want to make sure we get you every player we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be good stuff. We've decided to keep it to 15 tight ends, although maybe we'll mention one or two guys afterwards.
Yeah.
But, once you get past there, I mean, you're talking about a real drop in quality. And
yeah.
My one piece of advice going into this, you try to snag one of these 15 guys that we're talking about, because, even if you wait, that's fine. But, man, you don't want to be – I've been in this position a lot where I punt on tight end, and then it's like week to week, like I'm putting in guys that, 4 points, 3 points, 0 points. I can tell you from experience, I wouldn't recommend doing that. So listen to this. Tell us what you think. The Wolf obviously put a bunch of work into this, as he always does. We're going to kick things off with Tier 1, and this is a major, major hot take. This is Tier 1. This is the God tier. And like I said, hottest of the hot takes. It will probably come as very little surprise to you to know that Travis Kelce is the sole occupant of the God tier. I don't really know if there's much that needs to be said, but we're probably going to say something. So what do you have to say that'll knock our socks off?
Yeah, I mean, so bold, right? Given that he's been the tight end one in 6 of his last 7 seasons. The only time he was not the number one guy was 2021 when Mark Andrews blew up and had that monster year. He was the tight end 2 in that season too. So 1 or 2 in 7 straight, number 1 in 6 of those 7. You can't ask for more consistency. But the big thing is just how an unbelievable edge that is, given he's fresh off 320 fantasy points. You consider that a just wide receiver 1. He would have finished as a top 4 fantasy receiver with those, but you're getting that at your tight end spot where, as you said, there's 15 names here we're going to go over, but even after the top 7 or 8, you're starting to get in that territory where these are, the better bets to be a tight end 1, but it is just a throwing at the dart at a certain point. And so when you can get that stability, it's no surprise that Travis Kelce last year was number 8 among all players in underdog advance rate. A whopping 30% of the teams that drafted Kelce made it to that next round of the playoffs in underdog drafts, given how big of an edge you are. The next closest tight end was number 28 on that list. And it was actually Evan Ingram, of all people. He had some blow-ups down the stretch that carried owners in. But that's how crazy, that's how big the gap is, how much better Travis Kelce is than the rest of the position. Sure, there are some guys that could threaten him, but you would be psychotic to consider anyone other than Travis Kelce your number 1 tight end. Plus, the Chiefs also rank 5th with 15 targets inside the 10 now vacated. That's where he does his damage, so even more potential upside. The big question, will he get it done without Tyreek Hill? He was opening up all the space for Travis Kelce to eat. No, he was the centerpiece. He had his best season yet with over 320 fantasy points, nearly 60 more than the last year before that for him. He's just an absolute monster. In fact, he's actually been a tight end, top 12 tight end, which again, it's not a high bar to make that one, but he's been a top 12 tight end in a whopping 85% of games since Pat Mahomes arrived. It's just such a ridiculous edge. No other tight end has that floor and has the ceiling to go, multiple 30-point games as well. 2 30-point games, 7 to 8 in the 20 range at 8 games in the 20-point range. This guy is just an absolute steal. I consider him a locked-in top 5 pick in all drafts. I think at the end of last year, I actually had it pop up the other day on my phone. I set a reminder to myself, draft Travis Kelce #1 overall. You remember that
when we had that conversation? You know what? It's not stupid.
No, not at all. He is absolutely in that conversation, given the edge he gives you over the field.
Let me put this to you real quick. So first of all, Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, we all asked questions about them going into last year. Oh, will they be as good without this guy or this guy? Yeah, they're all still awesome. Okay. You don't have to worry about any of those guys. They're all fine. Second thing about Travis Kelce, just to give you a sense of how much more incredible he is than, say, the gap between 1 and 2 is obviously bigger at this position than anywhere. You would agree with that, right?
Oh, yeah. And there's tons of metrics that show that. Absolutely.
Okay. That's just eye test for me. I don't have any stats in front of me, but
there's stats.
Just to give you a sense, Travis Kelce, he's a tight end in the NFL. He hosted Saturday Night Live. How far do you think Mark Andrews is from hosting Saturday Night Live?
Quite a ways away.
He would have to. Anyway, that's how I look at it.
That's the biggest data point you can pull. That's why he should be the number 1 tight end.
He's a tight end, Mark Andrews. Are you kidding me? They wouldn't even let him on the set. All right. Tier 2. Spoiler, I already just gave it to you. The only threat to God, which I'm assuming is Satan. So are you on the air right now referring to Mark Andrews as Satan?
I did not.
You're going to go on record right now?
He is the Antichrist. He has taken over. Not at all. I don't know where that came
from.
That's
why he'll never host Saturday Night Live.
Yes. The only guy that could be a real threat, though, is Andrews. And the reason why that's the case is it was in 2021. He actually did outscore Travis Kelce. Why might he actually be able to do that again? Well, he probably won't. Let's just get that off the chest. But tight end 5, 7, 1, and 4 in the last 4. So he had that monster year in 2021. We've seen it before. We know Lamar Jackson loves him. Why I'm much higher on Andrews this year as compared to what we saw last year, why do I think he could rebound and be the clear-cut number 2 tight end again, is air raid Todd Monken arriving. We've talked about this on the quarterback show and why I'm back all in on Lamar Jackson again. Todd Monken, 16th, 3rd, 4th, and 19th in pass attempts, top 10 in pass TDs in 3 of his 4 years, top 4 in passing yards in 2 of his 4. This guy loves to air it out compared to Greg Roman, 32nd, 9th, and 28th in pass attempts. So just on a sheer volume point, this is going to be a much bigger aerial pie. Granted, he's going to have some more mouths to contend with. It has been the clear-cut Mark Andrews #1 and really nobody else even close to him on this team. Now you have Odell. They draft Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. We got some good weapons here. I still think Mark Andrews will be that #1 target in this offense. We've seen Todd Monken, yes, in the NFL, those were his pass attempts per game, but also at Georgia when he was working over there, his tight ends were thriving as the main veins of the passing attack there. So he just knows how to use all his weapons, Monken does, in a pass-happier attack. So I think Mark Andrews, I don't think he'll be the tight end 1, but I think he's a very, very good bet to finish as the next guy behind Travis Kelce. That's why he's a tier by himself.
Agree with all that. When we moved, so we've had 2 tiers, each occupied by 1 guy, and we're actually going to hit our 3rd tier that is a 1-guy tier. So we have a very clear pecking order, 1, 2, 3, and then we start actually getting some groups where you can maybe make an argument. Tier 3, maybe there is another threat to God after all. I tried really hard to think of something clever to put after that. The only stuff I could come up with was too offensive to actually put on the air. So I just went with your banner. And that's TJ Hawkinson. I don't think he's another threat to God after all, but point taken that he is the number 3 guy. And I could even see making a case for him being the number 2 guy.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at all his numbers last year, it's almost 2 across the board. Obviously, Kelce occupying pretty much #1 spot in whatever you look at, but Hawkinson, 2nd in targets, 2nd in receptions, 2nd in receiving yards, 2nd in PPR points per game. And it was really just spurned, as most of you probably realize, by his trade to the Vikings. You look at what he did while he was the Lions. He had one humongous game, nearly 40 points. His season high actually was in week 4 against Seattle. But other than that, he didn't have a single other double-digit day. He was just meh. And then he comes over to the Vikings, sees a huge volume spike. So whereas he was a tight end 1 just 33% of his games with the Lions, he was a tight end 1 71% of the time with the Vikings. He goes from averaging 6.1 targets and 26 catches in 7 games with the Lions to then averaging 8.6 targets. That's elite volume for a tight end, having 60 catches in his 10 games, 6 catches per game. That's also elite. And then that doesn't even factor in the last time we saw him, 10 catches and 129 yards in that playoff game against the Giants. So Hockenson really found his groove here. He's the clear-cut number 2 behind Justin Jefferson and finds all the space in the world when you have that type of weapon commanding defensive attention. I think it's more of the same, just great weapon for Kirk Cousins, who loves to dink and dunk it. Very high percentage guy. I think he's only going to get better in his second offseason now with more time to continue to grow in that offense. I love TJ Hockenson, definitely the clear-cut 3. You could maybe lump him and Andrews in the same tier the more I think about it. Like there is,
the more I think about it, I mean, I would almost lean Hockenson if I'm being honest. I would, if I were doing this, I'd probably have him in the same tier, and I might even have Hockenson too. I like him a lot. 6 catches a game for a tight end. That's 102 catches. That's not bad, right? That's a shit ton of catches.
I mean, over 100 catches for a tight end is very, very rare. And Hockenson, definitely a real threat to continue there. And they got rid of Adam Thielen. So, I mean, even more volume potentially up for grabs too there. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to merge these 2 tiers. There's definitely some things I learned while doing my rankings. We'll talk about where I made as I dove in deep for this research here. But yeah, Hockenson, maybe this is one just on the fly. He probably does belong in that same tier with Andrews. I have been taking Andrews earlier in these underdog drafts. He goes right around the end of 3rd, early 4th. Sometimes even he falls to, whereas Hawkinson's pretty clearly like a late 4th, early 5th type of guy. So there is a gap in their price, but I don't know that there necessarily should be. So I am a really big fan of TJ Hockenson. Yeah, and definitely the only other guy that maybe could see the volume to approach Kelce status. Not threaten it, but
yeah. I'm not banking on that, but look at us figuring stuff out in real time here.
I love it. Hey, if you're with us here, that thumbs up. I mean, we got a decent amount of you here. Love to see it live. That thumbs up button would be so greatly appreciated. Can you get us out to more people, whether you're live, catching the replay? It does really help us grow Wolfpack. So thanks again for those degenerates that are with us this early on a random Thursday. Hell yeah, you're the best. Get your questions in. We'll be happy to answer them all when we're done with this. The top 15 will move pretty quick. So any questions we got, we'll have good time for. So let us know if you got anything we can help answer.
Yeah, my wife's going to be pumped that, by the way, I'm knocking this out.
Hell yeah. My fiance too. She has a friend visiting that she was a little upset that I was going to be busy tonight. So this worked out perfect that you're able to
my wife, when I mentioned, I'm recording, it's like, she's not like mad about it, but she doesn't love it. But then when I mention I'm recording back-to-back nights, she had graduation Tuesday, so we haven't really seen each other much.
Yeah.
And, she gave me one of those looks. You know her. You've seen the principal.
Oh, I know the look. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, we're both sparing ourselves the look today.
I know. This is seriously
great.
We're going to be better off for it. Maybe sacrificing a few live viewers, but long term, this is the thing.
Keeping ourselves alive. That's the key here.
Sure. That's the real long term strategy.
Yeah.
So tier 4, we got elite tight end 1s. These are guys that if you get them, you're happy. These guys still have major sex appeal, and you actually had a last minute flip. On one of these guys, which I changed just a couple minutes on the list before we went on the air. And that is this guy here, who you did have 5. You wanted him at 4 after you looked over some things and kind of had a revelation. George Kittle coming in at number 4.
Yeah, and most people would have Kittle at 4, so I was being a little contrarian. I love Dallas Goedert. It's more about a love for Goedert than a lack of love for Kittle, but I really kind of thought he was much boomer and bustier than I actually realized, and especially when you factor in how damn good he was when Brock Purdy finally took over there in week 14. So in those 5 games he played with Brock Purdy, George Kittle averaged 18.6 points per game. That would be enough to threaten Travis Kelce there. He had a monstrous stretch where he was a tight end 1 in 4 of those 5 games. So 80% of the time, did have a little bit of a dud in that week. That first start of Brock Purdy's, it was only 6.8 points. That still was good for a top 24 tight end, but that just goes to show how bad the position is overall. And I kind of throw that one out because the Niners just pounded them that game. If you look at the script, they won 35-7. They took the air out of the ball early and had no reason to throw. Whenever they were actually throwing the rock, we saw Kittle really thrive with Brock Purdy. So he goes from averaging 18.7 points per game with Purdy to 10.9 without him. I mean, that is a significant jump. And that obviously is going to transition to, is Purdy going to be the starter or not? All the early offseason reports said yes, but that also Trey Lance has looked very impressive. Now, Lance has been he's made Kittle an afterthought every time he's been the quarterback. So that would be a big concern. That's where I would drop George Kittle below Goedert, maybe even below number 6 on our list as well. But the fact that his two highest scoring weeks came with Purdy, that he was an 80% tight end 1 with Purdy, I assume that Purdy's going to win this job. To me, that's a no-brainer. I love him. He's falling to like late 5, early 6 right now in Underdog, and I haven't really been capitalizing until I just started to research these numbers. I'll be trying to get myself a whole lot more George Kittle at this point, yes.
Kittle at his best is really incredible. So I know we haven't seen a ton of it recently. We did see some games last year where he was awesome, and you remember. But man, when he was prime Kittle, I mean, when he was the number 2 guy, basically, he was so incredible.
Unbelievable. He still really is. And if you were just ranking this on terms of just ability as a complete whole tight end, as a blocker, as a physical specimen, as everything, he's probably number 1 on this list in terms of my favorite player to watch and just his skill set. I'm in love with George Kittle. It's just a matter of the inconsistencies in terms of how often is he used, whether they can pound the rock if they can. But man, I just love Kittle as a player. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. He still last year was an absolute bull whenever he was used right. Yeah.
He's also such a stereotypical white guy looking tight end.
Yeah, just he is the prototypical just tight end. Yeah, exactly.
He looks exactly the way you'd expect him to look.
If you were drawing up your just classic, just like Gronkian style. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's what he is. The beard, the long hair. That's the guy. Anyway,
Dallas
Dallas Goedert, the guy that you had because you were being contrarian, of course. But now you bumped him down to a pathetic ranking of 5. I'd say that's still pretty solid. You get this guy on your team, you're pretty happy. Sell me on Goedert real quick, although you don't have to because
he's not like a crazy spike week guy like some of these other 4 we've talked about ahead of him, but he is really steady. A tight end 1, 67% of the time when he was out there this last year, double digits in all but 4 games. A really solid effort here from Dallas Goedert at a position that's really hard to find consistency at. He was really solid, and that was with only 3 touchdowns. So it was just good, steady receiving work. 703 yards in only 10 games. He got hurt early. Two of his double-digit games, he got hurt early on too. So he really just was a steady vein of this offense. Already this offseason, he's been working with wide receivers rather than the tight end position to refine his routes because he's going to be splitting out more often here. They actually signed a couple big blocking tight ends. So maybe we're even going to see some more varied usage from Dallas Goedert here. But even if not, if you just rinse and repeat the role from last year, you're getting yourself one of the most reliable, consistent tight ends in the game, and there's a ceiling for even more. High floor, high ceiling. I love Dallas Goedert, and I just love any pieces of this offense.
I love Goedert too, and what you said initially when you talk about it, he doesn't have the humongous booms that a lot of these other guys have, and then you said, which I think is a point worth circling back to, it kind of goes to show how shallow the position is.
Yeah.
That someone with his numbers is legit. I believe he is correctly ranked the 5th best guy. So you are talking about a real step down after you get a few of these guys. So
absolutely. Well, in truth, yes, he's not even booming, but you think about how many tight ends, other than 6 or 7 of them, you're throwing a dart and hoping for a touchdown, right? So many owners have 0 at their tight end many weeks because they just didn't guess right on which streamer they should play. So when you have 11 to 12 to 15 points pretty much a week coming from Dallas Goedert, that really can get you a nice steady edge, a nice stabilizing force, and a great locker room presence. You love that.
Great locker room. You can't undersell that. No, that's a great point. I mean, if you could rely on how many tight ends are there that get a consistent workload?
That you just will put in and set and forget.
He's one of them. He sets it. And next guy, and this is the guy that rounds off our elite tight end ones list. This is Darren Waller. You remember a couple years ago just how just horny we were when he got 19 targets in week 1.
Yes.
The fact that I still remember like Darren Waller's stat line from like a game that he played 2 or 3 years ago should tell you something.
It should, yeah. That's right back in the days where he was the tight end 2 and tight end 2, 2019, 2020, the only guy that was sniffing Kelce's jockstrap back then. And even in that 2020 season, he had 5 more catches than Travis Kelce. Just a lot more touchdowns ended up falling Kelce's way, and he outscored him in fantasy. But man, that's the type of upside that is there with Darren Waller. Sure, he's only been the tight end 7, tight end 9 the past 2 seasons in points per game, largely due to injuries and suboptimal usage, in my opinion. I don't think you can't predict injuries, so maybe that happens, but I certainly do not expect suboptimal usage in a Brian Daboll-led attack. This guy knows how to maximize the weapons that he has at his disposal. He's used tight ends well in the past while he was with Buffalo. And Dawson Knox had a 15 touchdown nearly season under his watch. So I absolutely think Darren Waller, who in early OTAs, everybody's just absolutely gushing for Daboll, Daniel Jones. Waller himself just saying how what a breath of fresh air after being under John Gruden and Josh McDaniels, 2 of the least player-friendly coaches you can imagine. Brian Daboll really incorporates his players, gets them in meetings. He just said right now it's a very empowering team to be a part of, and I couldn't be more excited. I believe my best days are ahead of me. We just talked about how some of his best days, they were insane. So if that's actually true, man, and the Athletics saying, Darren Waller, it would be a shock if he's not the target leader on this team. It's very rare you can find a freakish athlete, a main vein of the passing game, and a well-coached team and an ascending offense. All 3 of those boxes are checked. I would not be shocked at all, truth honestly, if Darren Waller finishes the number 2 tight end in fantasy this year. I don't see him beating Kelce, but if you told me at the end of the year we had a big resurgence and Darren Waller was the second guy, I would love it. He's studying in tape right now with their coach, Julio Jones, AJ Green. He said that we're not worrying about watching film of other tight ends. We're looking at the great big-bodied receivers, and that's how we're going to plan to use him. He's just that impressive of an athlete, is what their tight end coach was saying. He's moved around all over the place in OTAs. It's just there's actually no tight end I have more in underdog drafts right now because he'll fall off into 7-8 range, and I think he is just right there with the Kittles. And he's going after Kyle Pitts, which is just sickening. But he's right there with the Goederts and the Kittles, in my opinion. But you can get him 2 to 3 rounds later. So there's been no tight end I'm more heavily invested in right now than Darren Waller. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he's the number 2 guy when everything's all said and done.
Agree on all that. We're moving on to tier 5, and these are the remaining huge upside guys. And Kyle Pitts, for some reason, is also.
I know.
These are, I respect my colleague, the Wolf, very much. There's no way I'm drafting this guy. I don't care what round I get him in.
Oh, I won't either. It's certainly at his price. If he fell far enough, and that's what he won't fall this far.
I wouldn't. It makes me too angry. Like I wouldn't do it. Like it would, and you could not. You couldn't get a worse locker room guy.
Fantasy wise, yeah. It's like, why did you just pay a 5th rounder and take him above? I've seen him go above Kittle. I just don't understand the Kyle Pitts stuff. We'll get to him in a second, but I actually have Evan Ingram higher than him, which tells you why I'll never end up.
He should be higher than him
because nobody else would have Evan Ingram other than me and you, pretty much in the industry. That's how down we are on Kyle Pitts. And I have him at 8, and
people consistently like Pitts more than Ingram and these guys above him. That's just. I like Ingram.
I haven't seen a draft where he went after Darren Waller. He goes before Darren Waller in every single draft I've done so far.
And Ingram. I like Ingram.
And I like Ingram too. He was the tight end 5 last year, so really nice, just immediate fit here. And for all his drop woes with the Giants, 5th in targets, 3rd in catches. He was one of the highest tight end reception rates right there, 4th in receiving yards, and he was only 12th in touchdowns and still finished as the tight end 5. I think there's room for that to grow as a big body. Now, you do have to wonder, Calvin Ridley likely playing this year. He's always still a mixed bag, but him coming in, should it be the Calvin Ridley of old? That's a huge mouth that's going to come in and take a lot. But Doug Peterson has always, regardless of what receivers are around, has always featured the tight end dating back to the Ertz and then the Goedert days. He loves to pepper the position. That's why I ended up with a lot of Evan Ingram as a last round sleeper last year. That really panned out big, and there's very few tight ends. He had multiple 15, 14, 14, 15, but then in week 14, he only had one huge spike, but it just shows you 39 points, the highest output of a tight end all last year. That can happen with some nice steady flow. Now, there were plenty of duds, and that's like the really risk here is 3.9, 2.6, 1.8, 4.4, 1.4. Like there are games he just disappeared. And that happens at tight end a lot, so he's not alone in that. But that is just a worry that he was disappearing that much, and there wasn't Ridley there to contend with. So there could be a few more disappearing acts, a few less booms. But he really wanted to come back. Trevor Lawrence wanted him back. Peterson, everybody wanted him back. He is back now. I think it's the perfect spot for him. That's why I like him as a tight end 7 this year.
Agree with you completely. We will move on to Kyle Pitts now. And I mean, like, anybody who's watched us or listened to us knows how I feel about this guy. I've come by it honestly. I didn't start off hating this guy. I actually owned him last year, which is part of the reason.
No wonder you hate him.
Yeah. And I was like pretty pleased with myself when I got him. I was like, hey, here's a little score I got. I landed Kyle Pitts. Well, I landed a world of trouble for myself. I believe he was a viable starting tight end like twice. I mean, I remember him having 2 games where I was like, okay, that was pretty good. And one of them was like he scored like 13. So it wasn't like he was lighting the world on fire. It was like, okay. Like, okay.
Yeah.
And then he was back to like 2 the next week.
I mean, I'll read off the 10 active games for you.
Yeah, give it to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm selling.
No, you're right. You're more right than you realize. 3.9 after all the hype. That's how he kicks off his year. 13.7. Okay, we're on track. They're finally realizing to use him. I remember all this way, but he finally was on the field for like over 80% of the snaps, which that's going to be a big part of it against him. I don't necessarily hate Pitts. It's the fact that he is not used at all, which doesn't. Maybe you got to demand targets.
It doesn't matter though. It's the same thing. In fantasy,
13.7. Let me keep reading them. Ready? 13.7, 3.5, 10.9. Oh, maybe he's back on track. Down to 3.9, 19. Oh, but there's no way by week 8, if you've been running with this experience, that you actually played Kyle Pitts. So he had that 119-point day, maybe roped you back in. Okay, I can use Kyle Pitts again. 4.7, 4.8, 7.3. Year done. He's hurt. I mean, it was just abysmal. It was abysmal, both usage. He did look a little soft while he's out there. And I think there's just this, when he was coming in the league, a Calvin Johnson type of athlete at tight end made Kyle Trask look great in Florida. He just whipped it up and he would catch it. And honestly, a lot of that was true. He was a freak that was just such an outlier at his position that he went 4th overall. What I don't understand is where has that been? I don't know why, if he is that damn good because of this athleticism, why is he not commanding 100% of the snaps? Why is he not commanding 150 targets a game? Maybe it is an Arthur Smith problem. Maybe Pitts is as athletic as he is. That just isn't enough to get it done.
Yeah, maybe he's just not that good.
And what's an interesting study? It was Jake Seeley over at The Athletic that I love these articles. They're phenomenal, where he looked at what has the highest correlation to fantasy success. So there's like the obvious ones like yards per game and things that are almost a 1-to-1 correlation. But at tight end, some of the lowest of all correlations, like the red of them all, 40-yard time, vertical jump, unrealized air yards, yak per reception, broad jump, height, all of these things, these athletic, freakish measurables, ultimately have never been crucial for success at the tight end position in fantasy. So all the arguments you're going to see for Pitts, well, he was still 7th in air yards, even though he only played 10 games. Yeah, well, it didn't end up doing shit. We don't get points for air yards. I'm never going back to Kyle Pitts. Certainly not at his price tag. As we said, there is that athleticism that, as I just said, doesn't tend to even matter. But, he's that much of a freak that, maybe it could all click and he suddenly just blows up. I would take a stab at that at this tight end 8 range. The fact that he goes top 5 among tight ends, well ahead of Darren Waller, who has a much better track record and similar levels of athleticism and a better overall offense. Never going to be a Pitts guy. Never going to be a Pitts guy, at least as long as he's trapped here in this Arthur Smith offense that just doesn't seem to want to use him.
Listen, he's the last guy in tier 5. We have one more tier after this because, then it's a much bigger tier than any of the other tiers. I wouldn't take Pitts over any guy that you got in this next tier.
Really? Wow, you're that low on him.
Not one of them.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
He was an absolute migraine.
I mean, it's just like if I took this guy, if I ran it back with Kyle Pitts and I put him in my lineup and he started doing exactly what he's always done. And so, like, you'd have to be a fool to assume he's not going to do it again. I would want to, like, pound my head through the wall. Like, whereas if I took one of these guys and they weren't that good, I'd be like, oh, well, like, guess I was wrong. Pitts, you know, it's just like, no, can't do it. It's like, you know, I was about to make a really inappropriate reference. I'm not running it back with Kyle Pitts.
I mean, tight end 22 in points per game and all the athleticism in the world when athleticism doesn't even matter at the position. I can't get sold on him.
Tight end 22 is so unbelievably bad.
For a guy that was going in round 3 last year and is still somehow going in round 6. People are just clinging again to the profile, to the athleticism. It just doesn't necessarily matter at this position.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like an NBA guy that gets taken with a pretty high lottery pick. And, you know, after 2 or 3 years, like, they're not that good. You can just see it. Like, oh, they're a bust. They were wrong. Yeah, sure. Markel Fultz. Billy traded up to get him. And after a while, you can keep being like, oh, he was a former number 1 pick or whatever. And it's like, yeah, they fucked up. He shouldn't have been
kicked in the nuts. Continue to open the legs up, but yeah, I'm off the train too. Really, apparently, I'm much higher than you. And the more we talk about him, I haven't said really a single thing I like about him. So maybe
you're lower than the public, but I think you're still clinging to the narrative a little bit, even having him this high. I think he's an ultimate like prove it guy, and I mean, God, he has done the opposite of that. Right. All right, I could go on a Kyle Pitt. You know, that could be a clip right there if you want to put that on YouTube. I could go for another 5 seconds if you want. All right, tier 6. Remaining tight end, solid tight end 1 bets. Like I said, I like all these guys more than Kyle Pitts for selfish reasons. And this guy, you actually had 11th, and you right before we went on the air, you bumped him up to 9. Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, he's kind of the opposite of Kyle Pitts. As a specimen, not really impressive at all. Not a great 40, not a good vertical. But he is just always open. He's super reliable. I think 60% of his catches last year went for first downs. I mean, just a good, solid, safe bet to be where he needs to be, to catch the ball, move the chains, and let's continue moving forward as an offense. He was the tight end 12, 3, and 10 across his past 3 years, shouldering 89, 103, and 89 targets. And now he walks into a Texans offense that has the most vacated volume by a mile in the league. 2,860 air yards, that's 70% of it. 357 targets, that's 64% of their targets. 16 targets inside the 10, that's 64% of those as well. Each one of those things I listed is number 1, the most in the league. That's how wide open this entire offense is. And CJ Stroud, I really like this kid. He's my number 1 ranked rookie QB. Very, very accurate. He's going to, we often see, and I wish I did a study on this, like rookie quarterbacks and tight ends, but it does seem to be a common trend that they need that security blanket.
I agree with you completely.
You know, just the eyeball test wise, they want that safe, reliable guy, a big flashing body like Schultz over the middle. I think he's absolutely going to be that. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he leads this team in targets, and that's 100% what we're looking for at this position. It's not the athleticism, it's the volume. And already we have, you know, him saying, Schultz citing what I love about this too. A lot of people aren't recognizing this is a 49ers inspired offense, that Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan scheme coming over to the Texans right now. And that that scheme has often been very tight end friendly. And Schultz himself saying, proven scheme from the Shanahan tree, coaching staff, love all these guys, very good designers. I absolutely love this offense for tight ends right now. And that's why I signed with this team. And then the coach comes out and says, big target, quarterback friendly. We've played against Dalton a lot in the NFC, and he always made big plays against us. So I'm excited to have him here and see what he does. I think this is going to be a great, just overall scheme, player, everything. I want him above Kyle Pitts the more I talked about him.
You're gonna notice that's a recurring theme as you go down this list. I don't know if you'll be like me and pick them all, but I'll bet you the next 2 or 3 guys you're gonna be like, you know, I like him more than Kyle Pitts.
And the other piece of it
I've definitely said on the pod before that although just like you said, you don't have the data to back it up. I've definitely said that I lean more towards tight ends when they're playing with a rookie or a guy who's like a first-year starter, something like that. I've always just, again, I don't know if the stats back this up, but I've always leaned into those guys because I just feel like having a good tight end, good kind of like a cushion there, I feel like they get used a lot more. It's definitely happened a few times because I developed that feeling, you know, based on watching somebody. I just don't remember when and where.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
And he's fallen too. We're going to go through some of these other names. He's fallen obviously well below Kyle Pitts, who I'm now thinking about moving him ahead of. But he's fallen below Njoku. He's fallen below Freiermuth, like 2 rounds below these guys. And I think he has equal as much upside, if not more, to see 110 targets potentially within this offense. So at his price tag, I've gotten a good amount of Dalton Schultz. Like I said, Waller is my most owned tight end in these early drafts, but Schultz is a nice number 2 right behind him. Actually, there's a third guy that's right next to my number 2 owned tight end. That's not even in my top 15, but we'll have to mention him when we get to the end.
We'll bring him up at the end of the show.
For best ball purposes, you can't get better than that guy.
Number 10, David Njoku. Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
You know who I'm talking about right away.
David Njoku, and this guy, like you said, he was actually at the top of this tier until you kind of talked yourself into Schultz, which I really do agree with your logic on that. But Njoku, you can kind of add him to the list of guys who got dinged by Deshaun Watson sucking, although maybe not as much as some other guys, right?
Yeah, he wasn't as hurt quite as bad. He went from 10.98 points per game to 9.04, so lost 1.5 points or so at the position. But, it just goes to show there's a lot of risk here with Deshaun Watson. And unlike Schultz and why I bumped Schultz ahead of him, there's no way Njoku's ever going to lead this team in targets, whereas Schultz could lead the Texans in targets next year.
Yeah.
We did still see decent volume going his way, 11th in targets, 8th in catches, 8th in yards for Njoku. And encouragingly, when Watson did take over, he did score more touchdowns. So he went from a 7-touchdown pace with Watson to 4-touchdown pace without Watson. So he could score a little bit more. He did have a couple booms with Watson at QB, 18.7 in Watson's first game. Didn't really do much after that, 5.8, 3.4, 3.1, and then 14.2 in week 18 when it didn't matter to any of you. But now that Elijah Moore's here, Amari Cooper's already ahead of him on the target totem pole. I think Nick Chubb's going to get a little more elevation in that receiving role as well this year. It's an okay floor guy. He's a good athlete. We know that about David Njoku, but it's nothing inspiring at this point. I don't look at him as somebody with a ton of upside, and at his price, 2 rounds ahead of Dalton Schultz right now. There's good. That's often where I go Waller round 7, and then I take Daniel Jones round 9. And that's where Njoku's going. I'd much rather stack those 2 up and not think about tight end after Waller. He's in a long list. Like the next guy after him, we can kind of move right into him, Pat Freiermuth.
Sure.
I actually kind of want to move Freiermuth above him. Unless, did you have a thought on Njoku before we go to Freiermuth?
No, I agree with that assessment. I also agree with the fact that I would maybe bump Freiermuth above him. I also want to make an observation about Freiermuth, and I'm going to, of course, type Kyle Pitts into this point because I can't make any point without doing that.
Same draft class.
It's more of a commentary, kind of a repackaged commentary on the position in general, which we both already kind of expressed, which is you look at someone like Freiermuth, who maybe you're going to bump up to 10, something like that. Obviously, going far below Kyle Pitts, which is stupid. But if you look at it, and I'm this isn't off the top of my head. I'm actually looking at the numbers you put out. So he was a tight end 1, top 12 guy over half the time.
56%. Yep.
Right, which in comparison to Kyle Pitts, who was playable like 20% of the time.
Yes.
It's a huge difference. And this is the commentary on the tight end position in general. So he averaged 9.3 points a game. Pitts averaged like 7.6. I mean, it's only a 1.5 difference. So right. As terrible as Kyle Pitts was, tight end 22, like you're talking about just a couple points, which is why it can be such an edge to get one of the.
I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, 110% to get Kelce. And if you don't get him, trying to get one of those guys, I really think it ends at Waller right there at tight end 6 of a guy that could just truly shake up and give you 15 to 20 points per game at tight end. It's so rare to find that. Right. And so that's why I have Waller so much, is I see him as that last guy that could be that main vein with huge upside and ascending offense. Once you get to this round, we're talking through these 15, but even when you extend that to the 25, we're right in that, like just a point or 2 difference. And right. The only difference here, the reason why Freiermuth would be more valuable is because of how much steadier those points per game are compared to a Kyle Pitts. He's kind of like Goedert light in that sense, where he had multiple double-digit games. Well over half of his game went for double-digit points, but he never really spiked. His season high was 15.5 points, and there's not real reason to expect more upside, but 6th in targets, 6 in receptions, 6 in receiving yards. Just 6. Satan, maybe this is Satan, 666 right there. Speaking of the tight end Satan there, but ultimately finished as the tight end 8 in fantasy points per game. They have talked about wanting to run the ball a lot more this year with Najee now finally getting healthy. So I think a lower aerial pie potentially. Pickens kind of ascending. It's just another one of those guys that's, he's solid. He's just a less sexy kind of Dallas Goedert in that sense. He'll never really lose you too many weeks because he did have a couple 0-pointers in there. But other than that, he was always around 7 to 8 points or spiking to 15. Just a quality floor, cap ceiling. Love the player. As I said on this pod a bunch of times, I teach with his parents. Great people. You love the local products. And so I have no problem when I end up with Pat Fry as my tight end. The only problem I do have with that is Dalton Schultz goes 2 rounds after him and I think offers just as much floor and probably even higher of a ceiling, in my opinion.
Agree with you completely. Greg Dulcich. I never know how to pronounce that. He's number 12. This is the first guy on the list I feel like you're going to have to really educate me on. I don't feel as up to school on this guy as the first 11 guys on the list. So sell me or don't sell me on him. Go ahead.
I'll tell you, actually. And of all the guys we're talking about in this tier, if there was one guy that was going to leap into that top 6 and be a true viable one, I think it's Greg Dulcich. He's got all that freakish athleticism that you want, that we've already talked about doesn't truly matter at the position. He does have that speed, though. And why it might matter for him is because Sean Payton comes over, and at first he was very lukewarm. In fact, his exact words were, "I'm lukewarm on our tight end room." But since they've gotten out to OTAs, Sean Payton has said, "I've really begun to get a good vision of how I want to use Greg Dulcich." He highlighted him as the player that stood out to him the most and said, this could even potentially be the Joker role in our offense. And then he likened him to Jimmy Graham, to Jeremy Shockey, and then even went as far as saying that Joker role has extended to running backs like Alvin Kamara, Reggie Bush, and Darren Sproles. Now, Greg Dulcich is not any of those 3 running backs as an athlete or anything of that nature, but that is some good company, and that has always been with Sean Payton, the move it around, sometimes in the backfield, sometimes in the slot out wide. That is a hugely valuable role for one of the only guys that actually seemed to get a rapport with Russ. He was out for the first, I think, 6 games of the season, so he was out for a lot of it, and then when he came back, he was a tight end 1 for 50% of his games. He still ended up finishing top 7 in air yards despite only playing 10 games on the year. So I know even with only half the snaps, only in 10 games and finishing that high, I think Sean Payton is absolutely the mind to maximize this type of athlete, this type of versatility. I could really see him just being the one guy in this group that blows up and leaps into the next kind of tiers. I think there's a good ceiling to him that these others don't have.
All right. So
he goes late too. He goes after Dalton Schultz.
Right. You drop down this low, you should take a stab at this guy.
And I think right now his consensus is like tight end 18, tight end 20 type of range. He's going around 150, 160 in Underdog. So I have him a really whopping much higher than the expert consensus right now because he's one of the only guys at this type of level that you could see really ascending. That's how I feel about him. He's become the next, I keep saying Dalton Schultz, Darren Waller. Number 4 on my highest owned tight ends has quickly become Greg Dulcich, who I had none of early in the offseason when he was getting the lukewarm comments from Sean Payton. Now that I know Payton's bought into this guy and developing his vision for him, I'm back. I'm all in.
Number 13 on the list, Dalton Kincaid, who has been referred to as potentially the best pass catcher in the group.
And that's of not this whole group. This is of his rookie class. He was the first tight end.
I was just like, really?
No. But honestly, he could long-term develop into that guy. I just drafted him in our RSJ rookie draft on Monday. I'm a huge fan. I took him at pick 10, and I was very pumped. I have Waller in that league, and now this is going to be my future behind Waller once he's out. Huge fan of Dalton Kincaid. A lot of people call him the big slot. Well, that's great because that's exactly what they need with Cole Beasley and Isaiah McKenzie and all these other guys gone that really just kind of flubbed it up. The Bills then go and trade up. They made sure to go and get their guy in Kincaid, 6'6", 4.6 40, huge, uses that frame really, really well in the red zone. So yes, we've seen it take a long time for rookie tight ends in the past to translate, but when you're into this offense where they live in the red zone, I think this could be a 10 to 12 touchdown type of guy. I'm a huge fan of Kincaid, and they've already talked about how they're moving him. You talk about the big slot speculation, early OTAs, that's exactly where he's lining up, all over the place, getting a good rapport. Josh Allen citing him as somebody he's very, very excited based on what he's seen so far in these early practices. Yes, you got Dawson Knox, who is a good touchdown scorer, who has an established rapport here already, but of the two, I prefer Kincaid, even if they're going to constantly be nibbling at each other. Give me the better overall freak at the position, the younger, exciting talent. I like Kincaid a lot.
All right, at 14, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. I mean,
give me your best stat.
You know what? I am going to try to pronounce it. Chigoziem Okonkwo.
I think you nailed it. Chigoziem, I think, is how it's pronounced. But okay. I'm actually not positive myself. I think it's Chigoziem. Most people call him Chig.
They need to come up with a nickname for this fella.
Yeah, they go with Chig, most announcers, and I think that's what he kind of was referred to as just Chig. So,
okay.
Yeah, Okonkwo.
I like that.
Chig
right,
Okonkwo. Yeah, I mean, he's another – I just raved about Kincaid. So I guess that's where you could kind of see where my thought process was 12, 13, and 14 here, is looking at those guys that had these real glimpses of potentially being a monster receiving threat within their offense. And Chiggy didn't get used much last year, but when he was used, these citing Ian Hartitz here, who had this great tweet about him, out of 47 qualifying tight ends, he was second in PFF receiving grade, number 1 in yards per route run, number 1 in yards per reception, number 2 in yards after the catch per reception. He was number 2 in targets per route run, and his passer rating when he was targeted was 125. That was number 7. So in terms of a lot of these efficiency metrics for Chig Okonkwo, he checks every single one of those boxes. And then you add in that the Titans are 6th in vacated targets with 199, including Austin Hooper now gone, who was the one guy kind of staving him off. And should he have been? Clearly not. But he just was so misused as a rookie, and the growing pains of the rookie too. So I shouldn't say misused, but he just was about a 40 to 50% snap player. Just when he was out there, he dominated. They also gave up 45% of their inside the 10 targets too, which is where this guy, 6'6", big body, freak athlete. I really like the player. I do worry just overall. I think the Titans offense is gross. It's not something I'm trying to buy in on. So where I look at like the Broncos, and it's Russ Wilson, so maybe that's hideous still too. But I do buy into Sean Payton potentially turning that and getting that offense kind of humming. You'll never see a Titans high-powered attack, but he could definitely threaten for the number 2 or so role behind Treylon Burks on the target totem pole. And when he's been used, as all those metrics showed, he has really thrived. So an interesting player for sure.
All right, last on our list, this is where we're going to wrap things up, at least as far as the tiers that we're posting. Number 15, Cole Kmet. I don't hate Cole Kmet, and I don't know, maybe I'm trying to talk myself into him. I kind of well, why don't you tell me your thoughts on him? I'll tell you what I think at the end. I don't hate him.
I might be a little low on Kmet here, and I don't know that I should be. I kind of actually like Kmet myself. And the reason why, the research that kind of is making me feel better and that I want to put him up, I did this for Justin Fields, so I should afford all his weapons the same thing. If you chop off those first 7 weeks where they were not even an NFL offense, whatever the hell was on the field was disgusting.
Yeah.
Kmet did nothing. He was a borderline useless player. But then you chop those out in the 10 games since they finally unleashed Justin Fields, he averaged 12.2 points per game. I mean, that would have been a top 6 tight end last year. He had multiple 20-point days, back-to-back days, and he never was outside your top 24 tight ends. Now, again, it illuminates the position that he was a top 24 tight end with 5.7 points one week, 6.5. He only had 4 double-digit games in those last 10 and still averaged 12.2. So another kind of just detriment to this position overall, a mark there. But on the 12th targets, he still finished as this tight end 7 and PPR points per game. I guess my worry here is just how damn good DJ Moore is and how fast of a rapport those guys are building. Kmet was kind of the de facto number 1 receiver for a lot of last year once Mooney got hurt. So I think Mooney comes back healthy, and then you got Claypool potentially getting himself more involved this year. And then, of course, DJ Moore, as we were just talking about, he might be the 4th at best. So he was doing this decent damage, and decent's really the only word to describe it, as the number one guy. I do worry if he'll sustain that with some more mouths here to feed on an already very low aerial pie.
Well, I mean, if you look at what he did in his 10 active games, so you're over 12 points a game. I mean, you know, that's substantially higher than we were talking about Pitts and we were talking about Freiermuth. I mean, that's actually a pretty substantial jump up. I hear what you're saying. I think the reason that maybe I like him a little more than I should based on his actual performance in the situation is kind of the same argument that you were making for Schultz. I don't think Justin Fields is that great a passer. And I mean, you know, and so I tend to always at least kind of side eye the tight end in those situations. So I might be giving him a little extra subconscious bump because of that. And
I think your logic is fine there too. The only counter might be he's also, since DJ Moore arrived, that's become his, like, anytime a play is broken, he just chucks it in DJ Moore's direction. Now we're talking about spring ball without pads, you know, like you can't overvalue what's going on there, but their rapport has been so immediate that everybody's just gushing about it. That was Kmet last year. That's probably why he ended up having 12.2 points per game. He did that safety blanket.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking, I think the rapport with Moore is real, and I think Moore is excellent, and I have no doubt he's going to be the number one target. Yeah. I guess if you're looking for someone to get a consistent workload on maybe dump offs, I still kind of like Kmet for that. So we'll see. I think
good red zone body too. Like he's
a do a lot worse than Kmet. You could also do a lot better.
Fourth in touchdowns last year after having 0 his rookie year. He's really kind of evolved into his role. Jimmy Graham was holding him back for his first 2 seasons there. This was his first year without him. He showed he can definitely be a good red zone body. So at minimum, I think the touchdowns will definitely be very viable here. He's playing around a bunch of pipsqueaks. Yeah, I like DJ Moore and I like Darnell Mooney, but those guys are under 6 feet. You know, this is the big body that Fields loves to look at in the red zone too. And I think that division is going to have a ton of shootouts with the Lions improving, with the Vikings. You know, that's going to be a fun division. So yeah, I mean, I might be a little too low on Kmet, but that rounds out the guys that I had as potential tight end ones. Was there any other names below there that you wanted to highlight?
I mean, no. I mean, all right. There's one guy I'm always curious about, which is stupid because it's dumb, and I don't even know where you have him on the list, or even if he's still in the NFL. I always at least kind of am interested in Tyler Higbee.
He's 16.
Oh, is he really?
And I'm glad you brought him up, Truth, because I do think he probably belongs in this tier with these guys, given that it's Cooper Kupp and nobody else. And we have seen Higbee.
Right, that's my thinking on that.
We have seen him anchor this passing game. Yeah, we go back to a few years ago when, remember that 4-game stretch to end the year where he was outscoring Travis Kelce and just seeing 12 to 15. Now he's another year older, and it's never been consistent with him, but he could definitely be the number 2 target here this next year. He set career highs across the board last year, finishing as the tight end 13 with 108 targets. You know, that was a career high. 620 yards was the second highest of his career. The highest was that 2019 when he just went absolutely bananas. But 108 targets, 72 receptions, both career highs. And I think he's in a good spot to see that again. So I do think Higbee's a really worthwhile name to shout out. And he probably belongs in this top 15 tier for sure as a viable tight end one. And he's another guy. He goes around the Dolchickses. So I end up with Greg Dolchicks a little bit more. But he's safer, and going that late, I think Tyler Higbee's definitely a very viable guy at his price. So he's a good one to shout out. The only other guy who's my next tight end after him, tight end 17, that I want to shout out is Taysom Hill. Now, he's my tight end, I think 8 or 9 in my best ball ranking. So I do have separate best ball versus redraft rankings.
On our teams we drafted, we've grabbed him at least one time.
Exactly. He goes around 170 to 180 range, and he was the tight end 3 in fantasy last year. Now, that came in about 3 of his games, but there's almost no tight ends other than Travis Kelce that can have a 30-point day. He did have a 30-point day. In fact, I think he had a 38-point day when he ran for 4 touchdowns. And they've already talked about he's moving all over the place in early camps. It's not like he's forgotten since they just added Derek Carr. I still like Taysom Hill. And when you get to that range where you're just throwing a dart, I'd rather have Taysom Hill in there for the fact that he might win me my week. Everybody else has the potential to lose me my week at that range, and Taysom Hill most likely is going to lose me my week. But there's a lot of chance I'm going for a boom anyways. Why not go for the guy that can score 20 and 30 points?
Yeah.
They did twice last year. So that's why he's a great best ball guy. He's never going to be in your lineup when he kills you.
He's the definition of boom or bust. I mean, and when he booms, he booms, and when he busts, you're talking about zero. Like
zero. He might not even go onto the field in a certain game.
Which,
he might
you literally might not even see him on the field. But then there's also a chance like he might play quarterback.
Exactly. So
right.
Yeah.
So
he's the only other guy I wanted to shout out. He's significantly higher in best ball for me.
He's in his own tier. I don't know what that tier would be called, but he's an ultimate best ball guy.
Yeah.
Let's hit the mailbag real quick. There's just a couple folks watching.
And while we do that, thumbs up, guys, as you're wrapping up here, would be so greatly appreciated. If you have questions too, 10 of you here, get your questions in, and especially if you're not live with us, comment in. I'll answer all those questions too, or at Roto Street, we'll find it. But yeah, let's hit what we got. And again, that thumbs up button, it does. We wouldn't keep begging for it if it didn't help. It really does. We grew to over 3,000 people last year, which was amazing. Would love to get to 4, 5, 10K in the next year or two. That'd be awesome. So keep helping us grow the pack. You guys are awesome for being here. Without you, we wouldn't be doing this. So let's hear what you got.
So Jeremiah, who's obviously a long time
love him
listener, he said when we were talking about Kelce, and I was talking, we were basically talking about how much better he is than everybody else. He said he had 100 more fantasy points than the tight end. I mean, that's an edge over literally the second best guy. That's an edge of like 6 or 7 points a game. That's insane. Right.
It's insane. It's full touchdown a game better at the hardest position to find points. It cannot be overstated.
It's such a big edge. Like, I mean, us making that note last year, draft Kelce first, man, like I don't know.
Regret it.
I don't know if I could pull the trigger on it, but God, it's such
an. But you know you won't regret it. That's for damn sure.
I don't think you will. And I mean, look, you could regret anybody potentially. I mean, like, it's Justin Jefferson a sure thing? Yeah, pretty much. Is he that much better than the second receiver? No.
No,
he's not. He's not.
Right.
All right. I might take Kelce first.
I guess the only thing you got to consider there, truth is, it might be a little ramble, but
okay.
Is he that much better than the second receiver? No, but you also mostly start 3 receivers or at least 2 in a flex, whereas you're only starting 1 tight end. So Kelce really only has to be better than the 12th guy. Now, he is probably 15 points better a game than the 12th guy. That's a huge edge. But Jefferson has to, how much better is he than the wide receiver 36? Probably a pretty substantial amount as well when you consider the multi-positional.
He is better. He is, but like, I'm not sure that comparison is completely valid because like you're averaging the points you're getting at the position. So it's an average of your wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. So you would assume if you're a guy, that has the wide receiver 5 or something like that, you would assume maybe your supporting receiving core is maybe a little better than if you had the wide receiver 1. It's because you had to reach higher. So I'm not sure. It's a good conversation. I'm not sure. There's recency bias here. We're doing a tight ends podcast, so it's not that surprising that I'm all jacked up over Travis Kelce.
If you took Kelce 1 overall, I guess the takeaway is if you take Kelce 1 overall, nobody should ever sniff it.
One of us has got to like have some nuts and pull the trigger.
He always goes cheaper than he should. We both auction drafts. He always goes cheaper than he should too, because no one has a budget plan for $50 at their tight end. He's always worth $65, but he'll go for 48 to 50. I want Kelce this year.
Money well spent. I might do it, man. We'll see.
Yeah.
Daniel Howland. Daniel says, "What's going on, gentlemen? At work, trying to watch. I will definitely catch the replay later. Thanks.
Love that dedication.
Keeping us informed."
With us, I think Daniel Howland stayed for the whole stream last night, pretty much. I love that. Great, loyal fans. It's the best. You guys are so cool. Thank you, Daniel. I can't wait for you to hear the replay if you're not still with us, but hopefully you find it well.
And he does have an actual question. In case you don't get to him, what's your feeling on McBride? Worth keeping or pass? And that actually will round out the mailbag.
Oh, we have Charlie Menelakis down there, too.
Oh, sorry, Charlie.
A huge friend of the pod, Charlie Mano. So McBride, I actually really like. I have him at tight end 19. I have him about 7 spots above the ECR on that. We saw that glimpse, 10 targets in the last week of the year, showed that he was the number 1 tight end ranked for rookies coming into last year. And he kind of showed us some glimpses as the year wound down. Then you have Hopkins, obviously the definition of a target hog removed here. So he's got definitely a spot to step into and potentially behind Marquise Brown and maybe Rondell Moore, who can never stay healthy. Maybe you got the third guy on targets there. I don't love the Cardinals in general as an offense, and it will be interesting. They do have a guy coming over. Who is their offensive coordinator? I know the head coach is the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. So he comes over and he's already talked about how he wants his offense to resemble the Eagles teams he's made. So we know they've always liked Dallas Goedert there. I like McBride. I like the player. I like the potential volume. I don't know that I love this overall offense, but worth keeping or not, it definitely depends on what's the cost to keep him. Are you costing yourself at another player? Because most likely you're going to be able to draft him in your last rounds of drafts anyways. It's not a guy that I'm trying to give up any significant capital to. But if there's no penalty, if it's just like, yeah, I can have this guy or not on my team, I think he's worth a roster spot. I just don't think he's somebody I am, if there's any type of penalty to picks, he's going to go in your last round anyway. So I don't think you're worth giving up any draft capital or costing yourself the shot at keeping another player to have him. But I do like him. I like him.
Okay, agree. And now for real, the last one, and this is Charlie, who the Wolf informed me was in the mailbag correctly. And he's basically making the exact point that I made to start the show, which is every year I convince myself I'll be fine if I have to punt on tight end. Every year I regret it. So much pain. Saved my season last year trading for Kittle after his slow start. Amen. I agree. I'm resolving to not punt on the position this year.
Yeah, I think you got to look at Darren Waller as that cutoff point. And right now he's falling to 7 and 8, which just gives you such an edge. If you can do 3 receivers, 3 running backs, or like 4 receivers, 2 running backs, and then get, take Darren Waller there, or one of the elite QBs mixed into that type of strategy as well. I've really liked the teams I've built that way, but I also really like the teams I've drafted Travis Kelce with as well at 4 overall. I don't even bother with a backup tight end at that point in my underdog drafts. I'm with you. And you always look at like ESPN at the end of the year when they release their on the most championship rosters. Kelce's always there, but then there's always whoever was, whether it was Darren Waller a few years ago, whoever ends up being that actual number 2. I mean, Mark Andrews was, I think, the number 2 player in best ball advance rate in 2021. That's how big of an edge it was to have Mark Andrews in 2021. So if you get, it's going to be Kelce, you have to pay the round 1 premium, and that's always fine with me. But if you find out who is going to be that number 2, is it Andrews in round 3? Is it Hawkinson in round 4? Is it Waller in round 7? Whoever it ends up being is going to definitely be among the most championship teams of the year. I'm with you. It's really, and if you punt it, especially in best ball, you got to take 3 guys and you just hope like that boom bust carousel gets filled in. Taysom Hill plus 2 of those other cheap guys. McBride, a guy I like really late. Jake Ferguson for the Cowboys stepping into the Schultz role, maybe him. But I do really like Schultz as well. I know we highlighted him earlier, but I'm getting myself a lot of Dalton Schultz too.
All right, man. That's going to wrap it up.
Hey, tight ends are never that fun to talk about, but that ended up being pretty fun.
That was actually a pretty enjoyable show, actually.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys learned something about the top 15 tight ends. As we alluded to, next week we'll be live. Is it lunchtime again, Truth, next week? Is that, the projection series like we did it last year where we just go live?
I mean, probably so. Like everyone's going to be done with school and work then. Yeah. So I will probably be around. And
okay.
If I'm not, I'll let you know. And I think it should be relatively easy to schedule.
Perfect.
At least for a while.
Perfect. So plan on next week, everybody. We'll be live at lunchtime, 12 o'clock Eastern time, 12:30 Eastern time, whatever it ends up being. Yep. We'll do a different division like we did last year. Some of you guys said that was your favorite series of the year where we project out, stat out every player on every team and just break it down for you. The aerial pies, all that good stuff. So come on in lunchtime next week. For the next 2 weeks, we'll be doing that for every single division. If you're not already, of course, subscribe so you know that we're going live, at that bell so you know we're up there live as well when we are going with those projection series. Of course, all this content will be available at rotostreetjournal.com as well. On the way out, that thumbs up button does greatly help us as well. So make sure you do that for us. If you don't mind and you enjoyed the show, that'd be so greatly appreciated. Alrighty, guys, in a world full of fancy sheep, be that wolf. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week for all those projections. Later.